Hi, hail and welcome. I am Vicky the Nerdy Crone. I hope you've all enjoyed your festivities of Samhain or Halloween, whichever one you celebrate. I thought, as it is the season, I would share with you an experience that I had as a child. When I was a little girl, this was growing up in the 80s, we used to live in Ipswich, and my grandfather used to live in the Lowestoft area, and my aunt used to live in Great Yarmouth. And so we would regularly make this trip up at all times of the year, especially in the winter, because they didn't have the fairground open and we wouldn't be begging parents to spend money on us when they didn't have it. But anyway, East Anglia does not have any motorways. What Americans call, I think, freeways, but we call motorways. East Anglia doesn't have them. It has A roads. But that's about it. A roads and plenty of B roads. There's one particular road which at the time used to go through all the villages. Anyway, now when you travel up the A12, you barely go through any villages or towns because of the bypasses. One place where bypass hasn't happened, and that is Blythburgh. Now, I think I mentioned in my previous video about the Black Shook, the demon hellhound that is said to have put marks in the door of the church at Blythburgh. But Blythburgh was a village that we regularly passed through on our way up to Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft. And it was a bit of a strange place because it had these fields, well, what I thought were fields, but it's actually like an inlet. When the tide was out, you could see the markings of where there was once fields. And then when the tide was in, this whole area would look like this huge flood. Next to that, you'd see the White Hart, which itself is said to be haunted. And up on the higher ground, we'll say, you descend onto Blythburgh from Heathland. I'm going to go off on another tangent now, because there's another ghost story tied to the Heathland, which is now known as Toby Walks. And you can go and have your picnics there. It's quite a nice place. It's like a nature reserve. A really good stop off for having some lunch. But there's a story attached to Toby Walks. And the reason it's called Toby Walks is because in the, I think it's 18th century, there were some dragoons stationed in the area. And one of these dragoons was a black guy known as Tobias Gill. Now, from all accounts, he was quite good looking and he was very popular with the ladies. But also he was quite often getting into fights like soldiers of that time did. And it's said that one morning he was found next to the body of a young local woman. And he was accused of her murder. And he denied it. And there was no checks done at the time of the body. It was just assumed that he had done unspeakable things to her and that he had killed her. And I haven't got the research to hand, but from what I understand from other sources, people that have researched this, that he was sentenced, or he was taken to Ipswich and he was found guilty and sentenced and brought back to Blythburgh to be hanged. He's still protesting his innocence. Rumour has it he asked instead that he be tied to the back of a post carriage. But anyway, he was hanged on that site. Heathland was probably quite a common place to hang criminals, and he was alleged to have committed a crime in that area. However, there were doubts cast on whether he had actually committed the crime. And I don't know, how quickly all this happened, but it appears that somehow the body was exhumed and re-examined, and either that or hadn't even been buried yet. I'm not quite sure what the ins and outs were, but apparently an autopsy was done or a rechecking was done, and it was found that she died of natural causes. And so he was innocent, but he'd been hung by that point. And it is said that his ghost haunts that area where he was hanged, which is a really sad story. I hope if he is up there bemoaning his fate that he eventually finds peace, because he was unfairly hanged, basically. Whether or not it was to do with racism, I couldn't say. I wasn't there. I can't assume. But he was a victim of a miscarriage of justice. There are other people who've done some research on this, and you can find research online. But anyway, so that ghost story is on. But no, it wasn't him that I saw at all. So we're going back to my ghost story. Now, with my ghost story, we were in the car and we were going through Blythburgh like we normally did, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I think it was warm weather. So it must have been in the summer when people have fetes and events going on. And I just saw these two people by the roadside. We were driving past, and of course, in the sort of 80s, cars didn't really go as fast as they do now. And we were coming round a corner, so obviously my dad would have slowed anyway, even though my dad is a bit of a speed fiend. And we were going round this corner, and I just saw this couple on the side. All I remember, they looked completely solid, didn't look anything odd. The only thing that was odd about them, she had a really long dress on, something you'd see out of Pride and Prejudice. And I remember she had a bonnet on as well. It was a pale blue dress, and her hair was dark. And the guy that was with her was a young guy, and he had what I would call riding gear, and it was all in black, and he had blonde hair. And they were talking to each other by this house on the corner, which, if I look at it now, all that bit where they were standing has all been fenced off. But at the time, it was just a pathway, and you could walk down this path and into the house. And they were just standing on the corner talking. I remember thinking, oh, there must be a fete on somewhere because they're all dressed up. And I thought nothing of it, but just something felt odd about this couple because I could never stop thinking about them. And it wasn't until I found a book. Now, it must have been my senior school, so I would have been in my teens, probably about 13 or 14. Even though I'd been brought up as a Jehovah's Witness and we weren't allowed to believe in this stuff, I had this fascination for ghosts. I'd always felt presences, even in a brand new house that my parents lived in Ipswich. I still felt a really strong presence in there, mainly upstairs. And so I always felt presences. And even when we moved to Colchester, we lived in an older house, and there was an incident there where I had an encounter, which was less than pleasant. But anyway, it wasn't until I found this book on, it was Haunted East Anglia, and it was in the school library, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And I was just having a look through it, and Blythburgh. I know what Blythburgh is. And it talked about this couple. And I'm like, because I'd seen this couple, and it was a bright sunny day. And I read this, and there's apparently a guy and a girl, and sometimes the horse is with them. And they are seen along that stretch of road. They are seen either coming into Blythburgh or coming out of Blythburgh. But I didn't see them. They were in Blythburgh talking. That's where I saw them. There was a building opposite the White Hart, and that's where I saw them. Make that what you will. It could have been two people dressed up for all I know. It's just weird that the couple that I saw I described in this book, and I'd never read this book before because I was a little girl. I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I'm looking at a book when I'm like 13 or 14, and it was really weird. Apparently some people have seen her crossing the road screaming, whether or not that's true or not. But I would say this couple, they look solid to me. They didn't look, other than the way they were dressed, they did not look like ghosts. So there you are. That's my little ghostly experience. And so if any of you have any similar experiences that you'd like to share, feel free, drop it in the comments. Always up for a ghost story. If you've experienced anything similar, if you've been to Blythburgh and seen the aforementioned spirits, then what was your encounter other to that? Hope you've enjoyed it. Take care, look after yourselves, and mind how you go. And if not, tell me about it because it'd be fun. Bye.